Welcome back to the Digital Symposium 2018. I'm John Maloney from Henry Schein, and with me I have Sinead Mackinhill, Fazila Khan-Osbo and Emer O'Connell, three of the most distinguished female clinicians in the UK today, and all with an interest in implant and digital clinical workflow. So we're talking about today's barriers for women getting involved in implant dentistry. So Sinead, I'll start with yourself, if I may please. What has made you so passionate as a group about this cause?
Well, I think the three of us who have been doing implant dentistry for many, many years, we have long been of the opinion that every conference we've ever attended is mostly attended by males, and I'd say less than 5% of any of the people at these conferences tends to be women. So we were trying to figure out what barriers happen to exist and why is it that females choose not to go into this particular branch of dentistry. So with the view that the future is going to hold more and more and more females in the actual profession, 70% of the working task force of the dentistry will be actually manned by females come 2025. So with that said, we need to start to think about engaging women more in this and try and figure out what the barriers are and encourage ways forward that will encourage females in this very interesting world.
Fazila, anything to add to that?
Well, I think that one of the problems with attracting women into implant dentistry is that we've had very few women as role models for young women coming into implant dentistry to look up to and be mentored by. And that's changing quite a lot, as Sinead said, with more and more women not only taking part in the workforce in dentistry, but actually taking part in courses and education in the educational remit. And I think that's going to get better and better. But we also need young women to step up and take part. And that's really important.
Well, so I have three daughters, and so about 5 years ago I looked around and I thought, who are the people speaking about implant dentistry on the podiums? And there were no women there. And then I had to go, well, actually, I'm not stepping up either. So, and I think we've talked about this as a three, that we need to step up and make ourselves more visible in the world of dentistry so that hopefully that can act as role models and mentors for the future generation, because there aren't very many around or visible. There are people around, but not necessarily visible.
Yeah, that's great. Great to hear. Fazila, I'll put this one to yourself, if I may. I know you've been involved in clinical dental practice and also teaching clinically as well for some time. How did you find your career progression in the field of implant dentistry, and what barriers were there along the way?
Well, it's a funny story actually, but when I started in implant dentistry, the first thing that happened was a lot of doors closed in my face, and I was told to go home and look after the kids and send my husband. And I was very lucky because, in fairness to him, I was very well supported by my husband, which allowed me to go out, even though I had two very small young kids, and take part in education. But my first mentor was Ashok Sethi, and he was also very open. In fact, we've both been mentored by him, and he was very open to opening and breaking down those barriers that we feel, and he involved us in everything.
He was incredibly encouraging.
Absolutely.
Incredibly encouraging.
And that allowed us to then take part, and it went on from there.
And I know Ashok's practice is very team focused.
Absolutely.
As well. That must have been
Absolutely.
Some influence, yeah.
But he also said very, very importantly, because we understand the male domination of the profession, and that is true across the board of a lot of professions. But he also very vividly said to us on day one, there is more than enough to go around, and we should be sharing our experiences. And I think now that theme is becoming much more prevalent, not only in education, but the way we treat each other and share information.
Great. Similar?
So, well, my barriers were getting mentored. I think that still exists, and also there isn't very specific guidelines about how many cases you should have mentored, and all of these guidelines are being looked at currently. We've got a mentoring working party within the ADI committee who are looking forwards to try and organise how many cases you should have mentored, and also a group of people who are willing to mentor, and this should break down some of the barriers, because I think women tend to be a bit more cautious and a bit more worried about causing harm, and that then limits them maybe in getting into aspects of surgical dentistry.
Sinead?
The barriers, well, from my perspective, I literally came out of dental school, and within 6 months, I happened to be in a very progressive practice, and I had my first implant case when I was 6 months qualified, which was quite something. And by the end of 2 years, I just happened to be very fortunate that my VT boss was just incredibly encouraging. So I've had male role models in implant surgery all of my life, and I have never experienced anything but a huge amount of encouragement. Times that I had to be brave and keep going and all of the rest. But the first 50 implant cases, I basically was mentored by a great dentist in those days. So that certainly helped break my barriers, but also make me massively, focused on going further and further and further in the field.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I just think young girls coming out who are recent graduates, they need to be given that same type of mentoring early on. So.
Okay, great. Ema, we've touched on this a little bit so far in a couple of questions, but Ema, do you think there are barriers specifically affecting the number of women getting involved in providing implant treatment? If so, how could we remove those barriers or minimise them at least?
Once women decide to have a family, that becomes in and of itself a barrier, because generally they will have to be the caregivers. Not all the time, if you've got a very supportive husband, which I have a long-suffering one. But I think that can make it expensive to get the training, because you have to take time out of your practice and you have to pay to be mentored and pay to do the training. And if it's expensive, that acts as another barrier. So it's time, the expense of it, and then the support of helping you with your children if you have them, because obviously most of the time that role falls to women.
I'm sure, yeah, and similar for yourself.
Yeah, I think we all have barriers in life, and I think one of the problems with being young and not having mentors that you can look up to is that you don't make definite decisions about the directions that you're going into, and you drift along in a general practice quite a lot until you get to a point where someone inspires you. And I agree with the girls that it is difficult to find that, but I think now, currently more than ever, and I've been in implant dentistry for 25 years, that there are mentors around. We are around, and all of us mentor in one capacity or another, and people are much more able and willing to share and to have you open the door to the practice and have you come in. And I mean, currently I mentor over 40 people a year, and the door is open all the time. And yet, we still have hesitation on all the courses, even the Royal College course. There are less than 5 women on every Royal College course. And yet we find that those women are in the top 5-10% of the people actually coming out at the end of the course, and yet they still don't apply. And it is worrying, but I think that it is starting to become encouraging that people are starting to step up.
That's good. Great. Sinead, this question for you, if I may. Getting hands-on surgical experience has become more difficult in the undergraduate curriculum, which leads typically to clinicians graduating without those adequate skills. We've just been discussing it, Fazila. We know this is an issue. Are there ways this could be addressed?
I think that it's something that possibly needs to be addressed, and at the leadership and the academic levels, I think it needs to be addressed. I think that there are few enough women in high-end academic clinical roles as well. It falls in that sort of perspective as well, not just implant dentistry, but we need women in leadership roles who can literally start to bring from that very early undergraduate stage and lead them forwards in a way that makes them feel like they are able to commit to a career in implant dentistry. Surgical aspects need to be addressed, and there needs to be possibly a piece of the actual VT year which is assigned hopefully to something that is more oral surgery related, and that's something that could potentially be looked at.
I completely agree. I think that there needs to be probably a 6-month rotation in an oral surgery department as part of that early training in the first 5 years out of university. And if we could do that, that would certainly break down a lot of barriers. I mean, I worked as a house officer for a year after I graduated and did that full year in oral surgery, and that learning those basic skills of cutting and suturing, I mean, those are just skills that are invaluable when it comes to them further down in my career. I didn't use them for another maybe 15 years, but then further down in my career I was able to use that to do implant dentistry, so and have the confidence to know that you could do it.
So, Fazila, if you had the magic wand, as they say, with a lack of female role models perhaps currently in implant dentistry, what do you believe would inspire the next generation of female implantologists?
I think we have to go to them if they're not coming to us. I think people don't know that female role models exist, and I think we need to Education, I think, is the way to bring people together. It's always been the way, and it's been the way that our careers have all progressed. And I think if we can use sharing our knowledge, education, hands-on courses, there's a whole myriad of ways we can do it now that we can involve women and empower them and allow them to see that they have a part to play and demystify the surgical part of implant dentistry, which seems to be more of a barrier than the restorative side. Then I think women will understand that being able to rehabilitate someone with implant dentistry in particular is a great privilege, and it is one of the roles, one of the rehabilitative roles in dentistry, and it is hugely fulfilling. And I think that would really sit very well with the more nurturing, emotional, intelligent way that women do their dentistry, which is, and I also think women learn in a slightly different way, and I think we need to be a little bit more specific to the way we teach. And look at how the different ways that people learn and open up the way that we teach, you know, and I think that might help.
That's great. Yeah, anything to add?
Yeah, I think at the ADI we're trying to, obviously I'm becoming the first women president there, so that's a step in the right direction, but I'm well supported by the committee members in trying to get some kind of working party to see how we can help women to come to study groups, how we can involve them in the whole field of implantology, and to drive that whole conversation forward as to one, why there aren't women there or not as many, and to make the women that are there more visible so they can act as mentors and role models for the future generation.
And this one again we've touched on a little bit, it's the last question really, but if I can put this to yourself, Sinead. How have you gained confidence with regard to providing all forms of oral surgery, including the basic extraction and surgical extractions, and that's taken you on to do some of the advanced clinical implants that you do?
Well, yeah, this is the thing that we were sort of talking about earlier on, in that developing all of these clinical skills ultimately allows you to make much more informed choices and give people the ability to make properly informed choices themselves. Using digital dentistry like this and showing people where they can go, what they can hopefully arrive at, but be in control of that because you have all of these tools to show them. It's an incredible benefit all of a sudden for people to be in charge of the treatment that they should hopefully arrive at. And you're starting in a much more positive position from a consenting point of view, but the skills still need to be there. They still have to go out and do those soft tissue skills. They need to go and learn from the best in the world. They need to be evidence-based, and they need to develop those skills so that they can apply them correctly. And I think that's logically the only way forward to allow these skills to develop for the future generations of females.
I mean, I think when I was at university we had a leaderboard and you had to fulfil a certain number of extractions before you were even allowed to graduate. So, and that has all been abolished because people aren't allowed to know how many extractions you've done, etc., etc. But actually, it's maybe something that needs to be looked at again, both in the undergraduate programs and then just postgraduate, and maybe trying to get people involved in surgical outpatient clinics around the country where they do a 6-month or 3-month rotation and get mentored to do these skills.
Yeah, exactly the conversation we had earlier.
So I think we're kind of all in agreement. You need to have those skills and they need to be helped. And women maybe are a bit more timid about starting out on that path. So.
Okay. To the three of you, thanks very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the interview panel. Thanks for stopping by and to discuss a topic that's very close to your heart. Let's hope we can inspire a new generation of female dentists into some of the clinical areas that you have been working in and are experienced in. So let's take a short break and we'll be back with more discussions for Digital Symposium 2018 soon.